a gladiator who rebelled against the injustices of Rome. In 73 BC, his colleagues under his leadership terrorized the citizens of Rome. Besides, he fought till the last day of his life for the liberation of the slaves. Who was the gladiator? Today in this episode 1 we'll discuss that gladiator. The gladiator's name was Spartacus. He was a Thracian gladiator who, along with Crixus, Gannicus, Castus, and Oenomaus, was one of the escaped slave leaders in the Third Servile War, a major slave uprising against the Roman Republic. Little is known about him beyond the events of the war, and surviving historical accounts are sometimes contradictory. All sources agree that he was a former gladiator and an accomplished military leader. This rebellion, interpreted by some as an example of oppressed people fighting for their freedom against a slave-owning oligarchy, has provided inspiration for many political thinkers and has been featured in literature, television, and film. The philosopher Voltaire described the Third Servile War as the only just war in history. Although this interpretation is not specifically contradicted by classical historians, no historical account mentions that the goal was to end slavery in the Republic. The Greek essayist Plutarch describes Spartacus as a Thracian of nomadic stock, in a possible reference to the Mede tribe. Appian says he was a Thracian by birth, who had once served as a soldier with the Romans, but had since been a prisoner and sold for a gladiator. Florus described him as one who, from a Thracian mercenary, had become a Roman soldier that had deserted and became enslaved, and afterward, from consideration of his strength, a gladiator. The authors refer to the Thracian tribe of the Mede, which occupied the area on the southwestern fringes of Thrace, along its border with the Roman province of Macedonia, present-day southwestern Bulgaria. Plutarch also writes that Spartacus's wife, a prophetess of the Mede tribe, was enslaved with him. The name Spartacus is otherwise manifested in the Black Sea region. 5 out of 20 kings of the Thracian Spartacid dynasty of the Cimmerian Bosporus and Pontus are known to have borne it, and a Thracian Spartacus or Sparadokos, the father of Sudzai of the Odyssey, is also known. According to the differing sources and their interpretation, Spartacus was a captive taken by the legions. Spartacus was trained at the gladiatorial school near Capua belonging to Lentulus Batiatus. He was a heavyweight gladiator called a myrmillo. These fighters carried a large oblong shield and used a sword with a broad gladius about 18 inches long. In 73 BC, Spartacus was among a group of gladiators plotting an escape. Once free, the escaped gladiators chose Spartacus and 2 Gallic slaves Crixus and Oenomaus as their leaders. Although Roman authors assumed that the escaped slaves were a homogeneous group with Spartacus as their leader, they may have projected their own hierarchical view of military leadership onto the spontaneous organization, reducing other slave leaders to subordinate positions in their accounts. The response of the Romans was hampered by the absence of the Roman legions, which were engaged in fighting a revolt in Hispania and the Third Mithridatic War. Furthermore, the Romans considered the rebellion more of a policing matter than a war. Rome dispatched militia under the command of the praetor Gaius Claudius Glaber, who besieged Spartacus and his camp on Mount Vesuvius, hoping that starvation would force Spartacus to surrender. They were taken by surprise when Spartacus used ropes made from vines to climb down the steep side of the volcano with his men and attack the unfortified Roman camp in the rear, killing most of the militia. In these altercations, Spartacus proved to be an excellent tactician, suggesting that he may have had previous military experience. Though the rebels lacked military training, they displayed skillful use of available local materials and unusual tactics against the disciplined Roman armies. They spent the winter of 73 to 72 BC training, arming, and equipping their new recruits, and expanding their raiding territory to include the towns of Nola, Nuceria, Thurii, and Metapontum. The distance between these locations and the subsequent events indicate that the slaves operated in two groups, commanded by the remaining leaders Spartacus and Crixus. At this time, the legions of Pompey returned from Hispania and were ordered by the Senate to head south to aid Crassus. Crassus feared that Pompey's involvement would deprive him of credit for defeating Spartacus himself. Hearing of Pompey's involvement, Spartacus tried to make a truce with Crassus. When Crassus refused, Spartacus and his army broke through the Roman fortifications and headed to Brundusium with Crassus's legions in pursuit. The final battle that saw the assumed defeat of Spartacus in 71 BC took place on the present territory of Sinertia on the right bank of the river Seal in the area that includes the border with Oliveto Citra up to those of Calabrito, near the village of Quaglietta, in the High Seal Valley, which at that time was part of Lucania. In this area, since 1899, there have been finds of armor and swords of the Roman era. In the end, Spartacus was defeated. Maybe that's what this rebellion was supposed to be about. But this rebellion is recorded as a glorious event in history that will never be erased. Not only that, as this event is written in the golden letters of history, this event has served as an inspiring event for the next generation of rebels and revolutionaries in human history and will continue to do so. The heroic story of Spartacus is an inspiration to those who fight for truth and justice. The echoes of this great rebellion will be heard in history as people come together to fight for a better world.